Hey, welcome to a foggy morning at the Dubai Airshow. This is supposed to lift here pretty soon, but we're out here early before everything really opens, before the public get here. We're going to start with the Russian Su-57, walking through as close as we can get to this thing with a special guest who, of course, everybody turns to, myself included, when you need questions around air power. Let's get to it. All right, so we're starting here at the Dubai Airshow with the Russian Su-57 here behind me. I've not spent a lot of time around these, haven't ever really been this close to one in person. I'm going to defer to the experts, so we're calling our buddy Alex Hollings for some questions about this specific aircraft. Let's head over there and take a look and see what Alex has to say. So I know first things first, Alex is going to get into the nose here. There's something unique about the radar system and how this varies from other Generation 5 fighters.
The Su-57 is actually the first Russian fighter ever to be fitted with a Generation 1 active electronically scanned array radar that's similar in function, at least, to the advanced radars found in Western fighters. And while the Russian system housed in the nose of the Su-57 is not as advanced as the radar you'd find in, say, the F-35, it does have at least one very cool trick up its sleeve. You see, the Su-57's primary NO-36 radar is actually supplemented by two smaller cheek-mounted or side-mounted radar arrays installed below the cockpit. Now, each of these smaller arrays are said to have around 1/3 the transmit and receive modules of that primary nose-mounted radar, and combined, this gives the Su-57's radar a very wide field of view, allowing the aircraft and its pilots to keep an eye on and even target enemy aircraft while flying perpendicular to them, something most jets can't do.
All right, so Alex, I know one of the big things that came out of this week at the Dubai Air Show was they opened the weapons bays for the first time. Can't really see those from this angle, but what's the significance of that? Why does that really matter, and why here, do you think?
Yeah, despite the fact that these jets have been flying for 15 years already, this T-50 prototype in Dubai was actually the first ever to be photographed or filmed with its weapon bay doors open with weapons loaded inside. Now, the Su-57 has two tandem main weapon bays, each capable of housing two large missiles or bombs, but it also has two additional bays for infrared-guided short-range air-to-air missiles and its underwing fairings. And what I think is interesting about those secondary bays is that they extend the weapon out to allow its onboard infrared seeker to get a target track on that adversary jet before they launch it. Now, why did they wait so long to let anyone get a look inside their weapon bays? Well, that's hard to say, but we do know that Russia also waited a pretty long time, 6 years after the jet's first flight, to conduct its first ever live-fire missile test. And that all might suggest that they've had some issues with fully integrating at least some weapons into this aircraft, and that might be part of why they've been shy about showing it off.
Hey, Alex, quick one on the wings there, that thing that's kind of folded down in the front. What am I looking at? Like, why does that, what's going on there?
That's a great catch, because this isn't something a lot of folks talk about. What we're looking at here is a leading-edge vortex controller, or LEVCON, which is a specific kind of leading-edge root extension. Leading-edge root extensions are really exactly what they sound like. Basically, little wing extensions positioned just ahead of the leading edge of the wing that improve the flow of air while flying at high angles of attack or while doing extreme maneuvers. Leading-edge vortex controllers work in a very similar way, but they allow you to make finer changes to the way the air is flowing over the wings without also adjusting the attitude of the aircraft. And when you combine that with thrust vector control, or the ability to orient the flow of thrust from the engines somewhat independently of the aircraft itself, this is something the Su-57 has, it can allow for incredibly extreme maneuvering, making the Su-57 one heck of an airshow contestant.
All right, so the big question here, I think, Alex, is how does this compare? Right, the comparison here is the Su-57 to the US F-35. How do we line these things up, right? Like, this is no joke of an aircraft, but when you're putting them side by side, what are the key differences you're looking at?
You know, I think the Su-57 got kind of a bad rap because of the way it was presented by the Russian government and media. In terms of hot rod Cold War style performance, the Su-57 is no slouch, even with its fourth generation AL-41F1 engines that these jets are still running today, while Russia still tries to develop the engines that were meant to power this fighter. Now, those older engines can produce more than a combined 66,000 pounds of thrust under afterburner, giving the whole aircraft a very respectable 1.09 to 1 thrust-to-weight ratio in a standard trim. Now, that means it can pump out 1.09 pounds of thrust for every 1 pound that it weighs. Now, its thrust vector control gives the jet incredible maneuverability in a close-quarters dogfight, and it's a pretty rugged jet that can operate from relatively austere airfields. All of this would make the Su-57 among the more formidable fourth-generation fighters on the planet today. But Russia's insistence on calling it a fifth-generation fighter places it in a completely different level of competition, and it's one that the Su-57 just really isn't suited for. Now, this jet is all but certainly significantly smaller on radar than the Su-27 that it was meant to replace, but in terms of actual stealth, it's very limited. Most radar cross-section estimates place it at literally hundreds or thousands of times larger on radar than the F-22 and F-35. And with modern thrust vectoring weapons, like the AIM-9X Sidewinder that can perform 60G maneuvers, no airshow stunt is gonna make a missile miss, let alone the second one coming right behind it. And that's all before we get into the F-35's advanced sensor fusion capabilities, which might be its biggest claim to fame. In other words, technologically speaking, the Su-57 is like a Corvette that Russia claims is an F-1 car. If we compared it to other street cars that are more realistically its actual peers, it might not seem all that bad. But when we compare that Russian Corvette to actual F-1 cars, like the F-35 in this metaphor, well, it falls woefully short of actually competing.
All right, so moving over here to the American section at the Dubai Air Show, we've got the F-15 Strike Eagle. Alex, I know this is one of your babies. You can talk about this for a long time. So I'm going to leave this pretty wide open about what we need to know about this specific platform. I do want to start by saying, oh my God, this is so much bigger than I thought it would be. We've just come from a bunch of other kind of smaller fourth-gen aircraft, and I don't know, I feel like this is double the size. But anyways, we are going to get up there and take a look at some of the markings on this aircraft. But Alex, what are we looking at here?
The Strike Eagle is one of my all-time favorite jets because it's an example of how perception can shape battlefield reality. You see, back in the 60s, the Soviet MiG-25 emerged looking like the fighter jet version of a bodybuilder, with these massive air intakes and gigantic engines that, along with some other details, led American intel analysts to believe that the Soviets had built some kind of super fighter. So, Uncle Sam did what he does best and just dumped a ton of money into developing a fighter that could beat what America imagined the MiG-25 might be. And by the time we found out that the MiG sucked, it was too late. We had already built an absolute air-to-air monster in the F-15. So then, in the 70s and 80s, when we were looking for a new kind of fighter-bomber that could prioritize air-to-ground missions but still defend itself in the sky, the over-engineered Eagle proved to be the perfect basis for it. So we added a bunch of hardpoints, a dedicated backseater, and some supplementary equipment, and the F-15E Strike Eagle was born. Today, the Strike Eagle is still a huge part of America's air power apparatus. It can carry more bombs than most World War II bombers at speeds in excess of Mach 2, and if any other fighters try to stop it from completing its mission, well, then they're in for a world of hurt thanks to its Eagle lineage.
All right, Alex, now that we're up there by the cockpit, let's take a look at some of those markings there underneath the Billy the Kid. What are those? I mean, are those bombs dropped, missiles fired, rockets fired? Is that kind of what your takeaway is there? And where would that have been, do you think? This is the 391st Fighter Squadron, Bold Tigers for reference.
Yeah, you nailed it. Those bomb and missile markings represent successful munitions deliveries in operational environments, or in other words, successful strikes using different kinds of weapons, including bombs, represented by those vertically oriented weapons on the left, and missiles, but maybe also glide bombs oriented horizontally on the right. Now, it's tough to say for sure because nose markings are not official and they're not regulated, meaning that they can change by unit and by period of time. But my guess would be that the small bombs furthest to the left represent both GBU-38 and GBU-54s, both 500-pound class JDAMs, or Joint Direct Attack Munitions. The only difference is that the 54 also carries a laser seeker. Now, the larger bombs to the right of those are probably 2,000-pound GBU-31s, also JDAMs, just much bigger ones. Now, the first missiles to the right of that are absolutely AIM-9 Sidewinder infrared-guided air-to-air missiles, probably used against one-way attack drones over the Middle East. But the mix of even smaller weapons to the right of the Sidewinders are not as easy to make out. I think it's possible that these markings might represent GBU-39 small-diameter bombs, which we know have been employed in the CENTCOM area of operations. Now, these 250-pound weapons deploy glide wings after they're dropped, and they can hit targets from as far out as around 69 miles. But to be clear, I have seen other markings for small diameter bombs in the past, so if you can correct me on what these markings are for, feel free to leave it in the comments below. I would love to hear it. Now, the 391st has been deployed to the CENTCOM area of operations, mostly the Middle East, since at least June of this year. So, depending on how long they've been out there, these markings could come from engagements against the Houthis earlier in the year, or against ISIS targets in Iraq and Syria, or they may have been on there for even longer than that.
All right, so we had to come check out the A-10 Warthog here at the Dubai Airshow. Kind of the thing everybody knows about this platform. Of course, U.S.-focused close air support. Been around for a long, long time, but this is kind of the baby here, right? The burt. So everybody, that's kind of the thing people think of when they think of A-10s, not no different. But let's go back to our buddy Alex Hollings. A couple questions here as we move around this aircraft. Alex, this has been retired and then not retired or about to be retired, I feel like every year for the past 20. What's going on, man?
Yeah, you're right. The Air Force has been trying to retire the A-10 for years now, and they even requested retiring the rest of the entire A-10 fleet in their fiscal year 2026 budget request. But Congress keeps standing in their way, in no small part because of how the A-10 is perceived by service members, veterans, and the public at large. You see, the Air Force sees these jets as old, worn out, expensive to keep around, and not all that handy in a high-end fight. The newest A-10s in American service were delivered more than 40 years ago now, and just like an old car, the longer you keep something running, the more expensive it becomes to keep fixing what goes wrong. It's not just that the Warthog lacks stealth, which it does, but it's also so incredibly slow. There are now street-legal production cars approaching the A-10's cruising speed. And at full power, the Warthog is still more than 200 miles per hour slower than a fully loaded B-52 bomber. But the public loves the mighty Warthog and its massive 30mm GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon, even if data from recent conflicts shows that the A-10 primarily uses precision-guided bombs and missiles to fly the close air support mission, rather than that big gun. It is worth noting, though, that the A-10 offers a lot more loiter time, or time to hang out over the fight, than the more nimble and broadly capable fighters that the Air Force wants to replace it with. At the end of the day, though, it's not about whether the A-10 can be of any use in a future conflict, but rather if all the money allocated to keeping them flying could be better used somewhere else.
All right, so I gotta say, look, America first, love the U.S., love the Air Force. This baby's looking a little beat up. And if this is one of the ones we're using for display that's saying something, I think it kind of speaks to the maintenance challenge and the parts challenge of keeping these A-10s airborne.
See, I think this is one of the reasons you're so good at this job. You don't just see what's in front of you, but you recognize the second and third order effects that it might represent. Because you nailed it, these jets are old. As I said, the newest ones are over 40, the oldest ones are creeping up on 50. And while we did install new wings on a bit more than half the fleet a few years back, most of the rest of those aircraft are still from the late 70s to early 80s. Imagine a car that's been driven by different people almost every day since the original Star Wars was in theaters. Except they weren't just driving to the grocery store and back, they were pushing that car to its limits in a war zone. Even if you replace the engine, the transmission, and other vital parts, the car itself, or maybe the thousands of individual parts that make up the car, all still wear out over time. As a Marine veteran, I have a special place in my heart for the Warthog, but ultimately there comes a time with any piece of equipment when replacing it is just the most financially reasonable thing to do.
All right, Alex, so when we're talking about the possibility of this retiring, I know it's an emotional subject. Everybody, especially the GWAT vets, we all like the A-10, have a lot of probably positive stories about how handy this came in at certain times. But if the A-10 were to be replaced, what's the U.S. looking at? Do we have a viable option? Is there anything even comparable to this that's going to be able to help U.S. forces in the close air support role in the near future?
And there's the billion-dollar question. What aircraft could fly the close air support mission if we got rid of the A-10? And the first thing you should know is that the A-10 already doesn't fly the majority of American close air support missions. According to the U.S. Air Force, A-10s account for only about 20% of close air support missions since 2001, with the rest flown by a wide variety of fighters and bombers. In fact, F-16s have flown more close air support missions in the past quarter century than A-10s have, and that is a real sign of how the close air support role has changed since the 70s, when the A-10 was designed. You see, back then, it was pretty common to field aircraft that did just one specific job, with attack jets like the A-10 designed for air-to-ground operations and fighters like the F-16 intended for air-to-air combat. But as technology continued to improve, it's become easier and easier to add more capability to our most dynamic fighters, creating jets that can fly both air-to-ground and air-to-air missions with a high degree of success. And thus, the multi-role fighters of recent decades were born. Now today, that shift away from dedicated attack aircraft has grown to encompass the introduction of a whole bunch of different types of drones and loitering munitions, making it more possible than ever to give infantry units local air support assets that cost a fraction of the A-10's operating budget. So if the question is, what aircraft could replace the A-10, my answer is a little bit of everything, from small and inexpensive quadcopters to advanced flying wing bombers and every aircraft in between, all of which would probably be more survivable in contested airspace than the Warthog.
All right, so moving on, we have the French Rafale. This is a fourth-generation fighter. Big news around this one just in the last couple days. We got the announcement that France is providing 100 of these to Ukraine. So heading over to Mr. Hollings again, the key expert here, our air power guy. Why is Ukraine looking at this specifically over other, comparable aircraft like the F-16 or even the Gripen?
Yeah, Ukraine recently announced plans to buy at least 100 French-made Rafale F4s, which is the current iteration of the fighter in production. And they also announced plans to buy at least 100 more Swedish-built Gripen Es in the years ahead. And well, I do have some lingering questions about how Ukraine will be able to afford to buy and operate large fleets of two completely different kinds of advanced fourth-generation fighters in the long term. It's tough to deny how these two fighters could give Ukraine a pretty potent 1-2 punch. Now, the Gripen E is a smaller, lighter fighter that was designed with a primary focus on ease of maintenance and operating from distributed and austere environments, like really any 500-meter stretch of straight highway you happen across. Whereas the Rafale is bigger and meaner in all the traditional fighter jet ways. This twin-engine fighter has 11,000 pounds more thrust on tap than the Gripen, making it capable of carrying larger payloads while still reaching the same Mach 2 top speed. It's got 14 hardpoints for weapons and gas, advanced avionics and electronic warfare capabilities, and the ability to supercruise or fly at Mach 1.4 without using its afterburners. The Rafale will serve as the heavy hitter in support of the smaller and more operationally nimble Gripen E in Ukrainian service, assuming this all pans out.
So another one here, Alex, I don't know exactly how to describe this, but this looks very sleek, like more sleek than other comparable fighters we're seeing out here. Am I just seeing things? Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but I don't know, maybe that's a part of the French design.
Yeah, you're not wrong. The Rafale may not be a stealth fighter, but great pains were still taken during its development to reduce the aircraft's radar and infrared signature for that matter. And that meant streamlining the design to omit any 90-degree angles or really significant seams and gaps between body panels and components. And the result is a jet that nobody outside of Russia would call a stealth fighter, but that is significantly smaller on radar screens than many other jets of its same generation. In fact, the Rafale is generally believed to have a comparable radar cross-section to the FA-18 Super Hornet when they're both flying naked or without weapons or gas tanks, both of which are right on the larger side of Russia's Su-57's estimated radar return. Now that makes the Rafale about 1/25th the size of an F-15 on radar and maybe about 1/5 the size of a standard F-16. Of course, radar cross-sections are incredibly difficult to calculate, and you should always take discussions about them online with a big grain of salt, even when they come from me.
All right, so behind me we have the Dassault Mirage 2000. This specific one is it's a French aircraft, but this specific one is operated by the Emirati Air Force here on display at the Dubai Airshow. So, my man, Mr. Hollings, what are we looking at here? What makes this any different or more upgraded from, say, the Mirage 3?
Yeah, the Mirage 2000 may have looked a lot like the Mirage 3 it was built to replace, but beneath the skin of the fuselage, it carried some huge new advantages, like fly-by-wire control for better maneuverability, improved all-digital avionics capable of tracking multiple targets at once, a new engine that pumped out about 60% more thrust, and a sizable boost in internal fuel storage. The Mirage 2000 really compares well to other early 4th-generation fighters of its time, long before 4th-gen jets started incorporating 5th-gen avionics and getting weird new designations like 4.5 or 4++ gen. These days, Mirage 2000s have fallen behind their more advanced 4th-generation peers, but there was a time when they were among the best in the world.
All right, so a couple big thank yous as we wrap up here at the Dubai Air Show. Of course, Mr. Alex Hollings, the air power man himself. Thank you so much, Alex, for walking through all this. I need like an Alex Hollings earbud for something like this, or maybe next time we just do this together. I feel like that'd be an awesome trip, man. Second, of course, the Edge Group here that sponsored us, brought us out here to document everything at the Dubai Air Show. They've been awesome. Just kind of cut us loose to go out there and record whatever you think your audience is going to be interested in, document that, share that, publish that. That's what we're doing. So hopefully you found some value in this. I learned a lot, of course, not just through our buddy, Mr. Hollings, but just being out here and talking to all the engineers and seeing all this stuff. Pretty cool experience. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.